Hello, vinyl community, curious YouTubers, music lovers, whoever happens to be watching. It's James. It's good to have you back with me. Decided today to kind of take on a big task, and that is to talk about the one of the biggest groups in music history, and that is Fleetwood Mac. I had a request from a friend of mine, a new friend of mine, Cecilia Chavez, who enjoyed my Lindsey Buckingham video, as others have commented that they really got a lot out of that video. And I said in that video that I'd like to come back and talk about the wonderful Fleetwood Mac. So today's video is an attempt to do that. A very difficult thing to talk about when it comes to Fleetwood Mac, and because they've had so many different lineup changes and so many moving parts and pieces. I mean, the whole history of the band is more or less a soap opera when it comes to their never-ending saga of revolving lineups and changes in the band and things of that nature. So I'm going to do the best I can today. I've left open a couple websites here. That's what I was doing on my computer screen to try to help me talk about getting things right when it comes to the long history of Fleetwood Mac. Fleetwood Mac have been around for, since what, 1968, or even probably prior to that. They formed out of John McVie and Mick Fleetwood and Peter Green, who had come from John Mayall's Blues Breakers. They had some sort of relationship issues with John Mayall, as many others did at the time, and decided to form their own band. And Peter Green, being the type of person he was, and very much kind of understated behind the scenes, didn't want the limelight like a lot of rock stars do. He was the exact opposite of that. He basically told the other guys at the time, said, "You guys, we're going to call the band Fleetwood Mac because of Mick Fleetwood and John McVie," and he didn't want his name associated with the band whatsoever. Not because he wasn't proud of the work, from what I read, just simply he just didn't want anything to do with fame and notoriety in that regard. So that's the story. I'm sure there are other conflicting stories, like many things about Fleetwood Mac. But those and Jeremy Spencer, those were the four guys that really were at the forefront of Fleetwood Mac at the beginning, and they were a blues band, and that's how they kind of rose to fame initially, as a blues band. And I'll show you what I've got here. I've got a pretty good discography of just about everything Fleetwood Mac's ever done, as far as studio albums go. The few singles I have, I'm not going to mess with. I'm just going to show you the albums. So it all started in 1968 with this album here, simply called Fleetwood Mac. This obviously is a repress, not an original copy. This is a recent music on vinyl, outstanding sounding copy of the original lineup of Fleetwood Mac, including Peter Green and Jeremy Spencer and Mick and John. This is a wonderful album. If you only are familiar with the most famous period of Fleetwood Mac, I would really encourage viewers who are only knowing Fleetwood Mac from the 70s, their heyday, to kind of start at the beginning here. I know my very good friend James Lack I was able to talk to a little bit about Fleetwood Mac, and he picked up an original mono copy of this album here, I think it was, or maybe it was the next one I'm going to show. Sorry, James. And fell in love with it, and it really inspired him to keep going with his Fleetwood Mac collection, because they really are much more than just the 70s FM radio band that people love from the Rumors days, and we're going to talk about that. But this is a fantastic album, and fantastic for the period when blues rock was such an important part of the mainstream rock and roll scene. Eric Clapton was doing his thing, as Jeff Beck was doing his thing, and many others. And Peter Green was right up there with the best of the best when it comes to blues rock musicians. And they did that album in 1968, and they did another album in 1968, which I've just recently got. I've only heard it twice, and I don't like it as much as the first album, but it's still great. That is Mr. Wonderful. Such a strange cover, Mick Fleetwood. I mean, talk about a doofus. He's just such a goofy-looking guy, so skinny in this part of his life. And this is a repress as well. This is not original by any means. I picked this up online off Amazon. It's been recently repressed, but it does sound really good. And this, again, was a blues album featuring that original lineup of Fleetwood Mac. And unfortunately, that was the only output that they were able to do with that particular uh, portion of the history of Fleetwood Mac, because Peter Green went off the deep end a little bit, got involved in drugs like many were doing in the 1967 through 69 and onward, and had a bad acid trip apparently, and fell off the radar for many, many years, and just never was the same person, and unfortunately more or less ruined his career. So the era of Fleetwood Mac that people initially loved with Peter Green came to a very screeching halt because of his drug use. But that did not mean the end for Fleetwood Mac, and that's going to be the theme of this video over and over again. Is just about the time you think they're done, they come back, and it just never seems to end with them. So the next group of albums I'm going to show you comes from a different lineup. Still had Jeremy Spencer. He was really the principal guy in this portion of Fleetwood Mac. Of course, it was still Mick and John, and they did introduce little by little more and more Christine McVie. John was married to Christine McVie in the early part of their career, and Christine had already put out an album of her own, the Christine Perfect album. I think that was her maiden name. I do have a copy of that on vinyl as well. Not hard to find. I'm trying not to get into too much of the soap opera life of Fleetwood Mac and focus more on the music. But the next albums I'm going to show you, a lot of them are coming out of this box set that I have that is not terribly expensive. It includes the next 4 albums in their discography, and we'll go through them a little bit. 3 of the 4 I have original copies of as well, so I'll just show you both, and that way you can kind of compare. There isn't that much difference. This next one I have to show you, though, that came out in 1969, I do have just the one out of the box set. I have not picked up an original of this one. This is called Then Play On. Here's the lineup of Fleetwood Mac at the time. Some of the other musicians that were in the band at that time, I probably should take the time to do all the research and make sure I'm 100% accurate on this stuff. But I know it was Jeremy Spencer's band at this time. He was the main driving force of Fleetwood Mac during the late 60s, early 70s. And the other musicians did come along little by little, but I don't know if Christine McVie did much on this album other than maybe just a little bit of sprinkling on keyboards and maybe some background vocals. But she did get involved later on at a much deeper level. The next album out of that box set is called Kiln House. This is a really fantastic album cover, one of my favorite album covers of all time. This is the one that comes out of the box set, and it is faithfully restored and done very, very accurately to be as original as possible. Great album here. I know the few times I've posted this in the vinyl community Facebook page, it always gets a lot of likes and comments, and it seems to be a very popular album out of their catalog. Maybe I will click on this one here real quick just to try to give you a sense of the lineup. Jeremy Spencer, Danny Kerwin, John McVie, Mick Fleetwood, and songwriting credits go to a couple other people, but I don't think they were very big players. The personnel was Jeremy, Danny Kerwin, John McVie, and Mick Fleetwood in this variation of Fleetwood Mac. So this came out in 1970. Yeah, 1970. Kiln House. Great album. Check it out. Okay, so 1971. They're very. Here's I don't know if this is original or just a later repress, but it is obviously much older than the one that came out of the box set, and this is the first one I bought locally here. Much earlier on than I bought the box set. Next album, 1971, is called Future Games, and there's a little bit of difference between the box set and the copy I have. This is the box set version of Future Games. Again, strange album cover. Some of their album covers I just don't get. And here's the lineup on this version of Fleetwood Mac. Of course, there's Mick and John here. And then Christine McVie finally officially joins Fleetwood Mac, and then here we've got Bob Welsh. So I guess we've got Danny Kerwin, Christine McVie, Bob Welsh, Mick Fleetwood, and John McVie. So Jeremy Spencer gone. Don't know exactly why, what happened. There's lots of YouTube videos, and I have been recently re-exploring Fleetwood Mac, particularly the Peter Green era, because it's very, very interesting. But obviously, they lost Peter Green between Kilnhouse and Future Games. So that was the lineup for this particular album. I don't care for this album as much, but this was again the start of something new and different. And Bob Welch was very, very good in his own right, and there's a couple Bob Welch albums that I really like that we'll get to. That was the box set one. Here is my copy. Again, I don't know how original this is, but this is early. Just green rather than yellow, so I don't know if record company changed it somewhere along the lines or what. But great, good album, and it should be part of your Fleetwood Mac collection if you're really wanting to go deep. Okay, the next album is a favorite of mine, and is a very, very solid album. It's called Bare Trees, and it came out in 1972. So they're really putting out an album just about every year, it seems like, and sometimes less. And that was the norm back then. If you went more than a year without a new album, you got forgotten about pretty easily in that world. So Bare Trees, Danny Kerwin, Bob Welch, Christy McVie, John McVie, and Mick Fleetwood. So there was no lineup change. Woo, amazing. No lineup change between Future Games and Bare Trees. And this is a much, much stronger album, in my opinion. I do like the album cover on this one. Some of their album covers I just don't like at all. They're so strange, but this one works. And this is a really, really good album. This has got Sentimental Lady on it. This was pretty much a popular AM standard radio song back in the early 70s. I remember as a very little boy, that one got played a lot. And, they always seem to have one or two singles off every album, despite all the lineup changes and all the drama that was going on. They always seem to somehow survive. Never big time, but, some of the songs you hear on the radio and they'll say it's Fleetwood Mac. It's like, really? Before I really got into Fleetwood Mac, it's like, I didn't know that was Fleetwood Mac. And there's a couple other examples we'll talk to in a little bit about that one. So that was the box set. Here's an original copy of Bare Trees. Isn't much change to it there. So that ended the box set. From there, they released two albums in 1973. So again, they were only going about 9 months between albums, and that is the album Penguin. This one is a good album. Let's see what the lineup of Fleetwood Mac was during the Penguin years. Lineup, Bob Welch. They did add a guy, Bob Westerson, on lead guitars. He also played banjo and harmonica. Christine McVie, they added a guy named Dave Walker. See, as you can see, I need the notes because who's going to remember all this? I mean, you'd almost have to be a super fan to remember all the different lineups of Fleetwood Mac. John McVie and, of course, Mick Fleetwood. But Penguin is a nice album, and they still to this day associate that as a bit of their logo. The Penguin seems to have some significance. I don't know if it's Mick or John or somebody must either just love penguins or somehow it got associated with the band. Not always. It doesn't always make it the albums, but if you dig deep into their catalog, you'll see the Penguin was a prominent feature in many of their albums. So, good album here. If I can pick out one song here, maybe the first track on here, Remember Me. Didn't have any big hits on this one, I'm afraid, but it is a solid album, and I was able to, again, give my friend James a copy of this not that long ago, and he seemed to like it as well, so I would recommend checking that out. Okay, let's go back here. I'm going back and forth between a couple pages. The second album in 1973 was called Mystery to Me. If you haven't ever seen this album cover, be prepared, it's strange. I have no idea. It's a monkey camel orangutan eating a cake. So I don't get it. I guess it is a mystery, because it is a mystery to me what that means. I have no idea, nor do I really care. The back cover is actually a little bit more interesting to me. I kind of like that guru sitting there reading a big, thick book. And there's our friendly penguin. I'm sure that has some significance, but what it is, I couldn't tell you. The lineup for this particular edition here is Bob Welch, Bob Weston, as I said in the previous one, I think I mispronounced it, Bob Weston. That other person I mentioned previously, Dave somebody or another, is gone. Christine McVie, John McVie, Mick Fleetwood. So you can see it's Bob Welch. It's really a four-piece. Bob Weston did do 2 albums so far here with Fleetwood Mac. But there's how they looked at the time. Mick in the center, John up above him, and Christine. So you can see we're getting into that middle 70s period here. Let's see if I can pick out any songs I like on this one. Emerald Eyes, that's a great track. That should be well known, and that's again probably one of those songs you hear it on the radio and I'm like, I didn't know that was Fleetwood Mac. The others, I am just not maybe as familiar with this one as I should be, but that track I mentioned, Emerald Eyes, you would probably know it even if you didn't think you did. Okay, so let's go back here to this other page and let's go in order. 1974 they released an album, and again, just a horrible album cover. Heroes Are Hard to Find. There's Mick. I said he was skinny, right? I'm assuming that must be his daughter. It's strange album cover. Don't get it, but hey, I think they did themselves no favors by some of their artwork. But here's the lineup. They're back to a four-piece. It's just John. I don't even need the other page to tell me, because I can tell you it's Bob Welsh, and then the three, Mick and John and Christine. So I guess the Weston guy no longer. And that's what I thought before I started that. It was just the two albums that Bob Weston had done with Fleetwood Mac. But they started and kind of look like the familiar Fleetwood Mac right here. This is what people think of when they see Fleetwood Mac most of the time, I think. And then Bob Welsh, he was an important member of Fleetwood Mac for quite a long time and gets very little credit for it. But they did have some hits together, and they had some success together, and I think that should be worth noting. Here we've got the song Bermuda Triangle. That was a radio-friendly hit. Heroes Are Hard to Find is another one, just the title track. So this must have been a moderately successful album. And this was the last album they did before the classic lineup. And I think they were kind of defining that classic Fleetwood Mac sound a little bit on this album. You can hear it in some of the songs. You can hear that familiar sound that most people associate with Fleetwood Mac. So this is the last album prior to the Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks era. So from there, we get a little bit of a break. We get a little consistency here in lineups, and I'm really glad, because they certainly needed it. And of course, in 1975, they released an album that most people are very, very familiar with, and that is the wonderful album, self-titled album, Fleetwood Mac. They had really rediscovered themselves when they added Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks to the lineup, and it changed everything. They had amazing success with this album, and it just skyrocketed. It was a U.S. #1 album. UK, I don't know what y'all were listening to in 75, but this only hit number 23 in the UK charts, so I don't get it, but whatever. In the U.S., we got it right away with Fleetwood Mac. It was a U.S. #1 album. So here's the lineup as you all know it. I'm not going to spend as much time with this album because you're all familiar with it pretty well, and it was just chock full of hits. But looking at it now from this angle, you can see how young they still were. Lindsey with his afro, and Stevie looking like a little gypsy woman, and everyone looking so young. But of course, my favorite song on this album, oh God, it would be almost impossible to hit, to say one favorite, but I'm a big Lindsey Buckingham fan, so I'm going to have to say I'm So Afraid. The last track on the album is my favorite. It is a wonderful, wonderful song. So if for some reason you've never heard that album, please go get it. Here's a copy. I was kind of excited to show you. This is the anniversary edition. 5 times platinum in the U.S. This is just a wonderful repressing on 45 RPM. Comes in a gatefold, tip-on jacket. Penguins all over the place here. As I said, they love the penguins. And really, really so well done. Pop Market was having a deal on this one and Rumors. At one point you could buy them both, I think for $50. It was a one-day deal, and I jumped on it because I love both albums, as most of you do. And I really wanted to hear it on 45 RPM, and I'm so, so glad that I did, because it sounds so amazing. And these are still available. I can't promise you it would be that low in price, but if you can find this in the $25 to $30 range, please get it, because it's so well worth it. There are color versions of that album too, and I know, again, my friend James has a color version of that, or Rumors, one of the two. Lucky you. So the next album is an easy one to talk about because it's one of the most best-selling albums of all time, 1977's Rumors. I do have an original copy in shrink, which I'm very happy to have. It's not color or anything crazy special, but it is an original 1977 in shrink, and it sounds amazing. So that album you all are so familiar with, there is very little reason to talk too much about it. If I had to pick a favorite song on here and someone pointed a gun at my head and said you can only pick one, let me think here. You know, I think I'm going to pick The Chain. That wasn't even a single. That just became popular on the radio without even needing to be a single. And of course is a staple in their live shows even today. That's the song for me that does it the most, maybe because the others are played so much. But I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say that The Chain is my favorite track on Rumors. I'll probably get shot for that, but hey, you know, it is what it is. Here's my copy of that 45 RPM anniversary edition of Rumors. Love it so much. I said all I can say about it. I will show you the gatefold though, because you know, the originals don't have a gatefold, but it's just a collage of photographs of Fleetwood Mac. And you know, again, I'm not focusing too much on the love triangles and all the different dramas and soap opera and relationship issues and all that, because there's tons of YouTube videos out there for that. If you're interested in that sort of thing, go check it out. Okay, from there it gets a little hazy again with Fleetwood Mac, because they followed it up with one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive album ever produced, and it took forever at the time, you know, almost 3 years for it to come out. And the build-up and hype and excitement and expectations were so amazing for Fleetwood Mac. What were they going to do after Rumors? I mean, Rumors was one of those albums that was so big that it was like everybody who ever moved to a new neighborhood is like, okay, here's the keys to your house, and here's a copy of Rumors. They kind of went hand in hand because it was such a blockbuster album. It was #1 on the charts here for months. You don't see things like that anymore. It's very, very uncommon for records to have that long of a shelf life, and I think all that drama and all the different parts and pieces of Fleetwood Mac finally coming together, then kind of falling apart again with the relationship side of things and Rumors, was enough to give it not only great music, but also a lot of interest, and that's why Rumors held a lot of legs that way. But anyway, going back to the next album, Tusk was a major disappointment for most people. Now, it has come to grow on me as one of, I would say, one of my favorite albums, because it is different, and it did break out of the comfort level and familiarity of Rumors, but I really like Tusk. It's a good album, and it got beat to hell. I mean, it just got beat up. Critics hated it, the audiences hated it. You know, generally speaking, it was not a very well-liked album at the time, but it has, over time, kind of redeemed itself, and people appreciate it now for what it is. But at the time, you know, again, how do you follow up an album that sold 30 million copies, was the biggest selling album of all time before Thriller, and you know, it's just almost an impossible task. So I do give the band, primarily Lindsay and Stevie, credit for doing something different and saying, no, we're not going to make Rumors Part 2, we're going to do something different. So and that's kind of the theme of the rest of their catalog here. In 1982, they took a break. Obviously, there was another 3 or 4 year gap between albums. Stevie was doing some solo stuff. Lindsay started doing some solo stuff. Even Mick was doing solo stuff. Christine McVie did some solo stuff. They came up with an album, Mirage, and I did want to talk a little bit about Mirage because it's so overlooked in their discography. I just find this to be such a great album, and you know, love it or hate it and think it's not as good. I personally love it. Every time I put this on, I enjoy it so much, and there's so many good songs on here. But I love the song "Can't Go Back." That to me is the you know, the great song on the album. Their others are good. There's, you know, the Stevie songs is Gypsy and you know, what else? You know, she was kind of quiet on this album. She didn't do as much on this one. It's just really more of a Lindsay Stevie album, or Lindsay Christine album in my opinion. But Gypsy is one of her well-known songs. Stevie Nicks, that is. Mirage needs a lot more love. I would say go out and get Mirage and give it another try if you haven't heard it since the 80s. It does have a little bit of an 80s feel to it, I will admit, but as a person who grew up in the 80s, I guess I have a soft spot for that, and I'm perfectly fine with things sounding a little bit 80s from time to time. Excuse me while I get a drink here. You can see we're going to be pushing 30 minutes on this video, but it is Fleetwood Mac. It is one of the most important bands of all time, so I guess I'm not going to apologize for that. From there, they went in 1987 and did Tango in the Night. This is a fantastic album that was chock full of hits. This was another big comeback for the band, and just seemed like everything worked on this album. One of my favorites, and I love the cover. This is, suitable for framing. Just fantastic cover. Here's the back cover if you've never seen it. Favorite tracks on this album? Boy, well, just they're all good. Big Love, Seven Wonders, Everywhere, Caroline, Tango in the Night, and Mystified on side 1. They're all classics. Little Lies, Family Man. Maybe Family Man wasn't the best, but still great. And then the last track, You and I Parts 1 and 2, is a wonderful Lindsey Buckingham song that, I don't know, everything about this album works for me. The only thing that didn't work for me is the fact that Lindsey backed out of the tour at the last minute and didn't want to tour. Fleetwood Mac, thankfully, is bigger than the sum of its parts. Their legacy has grown over the years, and they have a wonderful catalog, and I think that you take especially with the classic lineup of Fleetwood Mac that we all know, you take any portion of it out, it's not as good as it is together, and that's where I think they are today, touring now again with this 5-piece lineup. It never is as good as that. Okay, then that was the last album for a while that they did as a band with all 5 of them like that. They did come out with an album in 1990 called Behind the Mask. This did not feature Lindsey Buckingham. He decided not to be part of Fleetwood Mac for a while again. For whatever reason, he didn't want to tour on Tango in the Night, and he didn't want to do this album. So they brought in, let's take a look at the lineup on this one. Excuse me. Billy Burnett and Rick Vito replaced Lindsey Buckingham. I guess it took 2 to replace 1. Getting a tickle in my throat, unfortunately. This album is just okay. It's, I guess, for a completist, it's alright, but it's nothing like you would want from a Fleetwood Mac record, really. Here's the lineup. Stevie Nicks songs are alright on it, and of course Christine McVie always adds good value to any album, but not really that good of an album. I don't even have the next album. I like to be a completist, but it's just not worth it. There's no vinyl of it, and it's called Time. It had that lineup of Billy Burnett. They did get Dave Mason on guitars and vocals, I guess, and it doesn't even have Stevie or Lindsey in the album, so I really have no interest in it whatsoever. I probably should pick up a CD of it at some point, just out of the dollar bin, but it's just never really felt the need to do it, but I should. But the good news is 8 years later they did come up with Say You Will. This is a real good album and a nice comeback for Fleetwood Mac. I'm so sorry about my voice. I wish I could edit. I would just pause it. But I guess talking too long, I just lost it there a little bit at the end. But this is a good album. Unfortunately, there is no vinyl of this, so I just have to settle for the CD. But really good there, and I think it's definitely worth hearing. Favorite tracks on this one. It was just so good to have them back together, and it kind of led really before that with this one, The Dance. This was their big comeback. This happened in, let's see, live albums, 1997, and then Say You Will came out in 2003, so there was a bit of a gap, actually 5 years. This was 5 years prior to this here. There's no vinyl on either one of them, though, so I can only show you CDs, but this is mostly older songs. In 97, they reformed with the 5-piece classic lineup. And this has, a lot of hits on it, but they did have a couple new songs on here. Bleed to Love Her and Temporary One. Yeah, that was it. And I like them both. They were really good. So I guess, they had some success. Big world tour. and probably made a fortune, and decided to do a studio album. Also very good. Favorite tracks on this one: What's the World Coming To? Um, they're all pretty good, but I do like the song Red Rover. Not that didn't seem like it had any big hits on it, but it is a good album. I would recommend hearing it. The only bad part is it doesn't have Christine McVie in it. And I guess I misspoke earlier when I said they had the 5-piece back together. This album does not include Christine McVie. So the last time Christine McVie was with Fleetwood Mac was this, and then until recently she decided to come out of exile and reform with Fleetwood Mac. So hey, if nothing else, you can always go pick up Greatest Hits. They do have a live album out that I didn't pull out, but I hope I've done an okay job. I know I lost it a little bit at the end with the throat. Sorry about that, and again, I apologize. I can't do editing to make these things clean up a little bit better and not drag on so long, but I hope I give you a taste of Fleetwood Mac. I hope I've given you some inspiration to go out and listen to some of the things that you maybe are not as familiar with. And that's my take on Fleetwood Mac. It's a very short 30 minutes, but there's lots of other YouTube videos, and I'm just kind of finding out for myself too. And they have a long history of lots of different interesting stories and a lot of great music. So go out and listen to some Fleetwood Mac, enjoy yourself, and thanks for putting up with the throat at the end. Take care, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.